I do like to really want to specify to people that, to me there's a massive difference between systematic direct observation and naturalistic observation. Systematic direct observation means you're using some sort of recording system, some sort of methodology for doing momentary time sampling or some other appropriate tool. I don't personally believe people can do this without an earbud and a prompt. There's just not much data to suggest that people can look at a watch and actually at 30-second increments note a change in interval. But regardless, this is a tool that, when done correctly, can be a really accurate version of what's happening in the particular environment. My favorite version of this is still Seacoast. It's still the paper and pencil version of it. This is the Sodgrass and Creed. It's a 1986 School Psych Review article that it comes out of. This was one of the original versions that explained what momentary time sampling was and how it can be more accurate than either whole interval or partial interval. You have to get the paper version. Go to a library to actually get it because it's not in the computerized versions. It always angers my students tremendously when they're going to have to actually walk into a library for the first time in probably a decade, which means they don't read much old stuff, which is a little bit concerning. When Seacoast is done, usually it's done in 30-second intervals. There's no reason to do 15-second intervals. There's no evidence that suggests a 15-second interval is more accurate than a 30-second. But you get the beep. You say, what is the kid doing at that second in time? You mark down that he's doing schoolwork and he's playing with a motor object concurrently. And then for the next 29 seconds, every time the kid raises their hand, or calls out of seat, whatever. I'm not remembering the other ones, but regardless, you put a check in the box. And so you tally, you keep it within that box so that you can see the time delineated features between the states and the events. And then you could concurrently monitor the number of times the teacher does approach to the child with schoolwork, approach to the child with other behavior, direction to the child was oppositional, direction to the child was compliant, approval statement, disapproval statement. Within that one document, you get an incredible amount of information over a 10-minute period of time on what the teacher is doing, the frequency count of different events, and the states that the child is engaging in terms of the percent of time doing schoolwork, etc. I still, the one advantage of the computerized versions is obviously it puts the data and records the data. We're actually developing a Seacoast version for an iPad for a couple grant studies to drop the data directly in to a CVS file that go into SPSS or Excel or whatever. But other than that, I still have my students do this paper and pencil because I think there's something about doing it paper and pencil and seeing it over the course of the you actually end up with the time. And so you can see how when the kid's doing a lot of schoolwork, we don't have a lot of problem behavior and the teacher's ignoring the kid. And then the kid starts doing these problematic behavior and then a lot of teacher attention, and that starts getting at that ABC concept of, well, as a child, right? So it ends up giving us a really nice pieces of data. I think this was a real,
What does SECO stand for?
State Event Observation System. I don't know what the C is.
State event.
Classroom, thank you. Classroom Observation System. So, they've done no work on this subsequently, and this is one of those few SPR articles that I think gives a tool to the field, which is just a magnificent tool. And, oddly, never got much traction in the field. Again, I guess they don't sell it, and so if they don't sell it, nobody pays attention to it, and so you don't do it. So, this is our. It was School Psych Review 1986, and it's Sodgrass and Creed. I, for a long time, thought it was the Sodgrass and something and Creed, Sodgrass, but it's not. If somebody emails me, I've actually got Word versions of this because you never need all of these codes. And when people try to do it with these codes, it drives them insane. After 2 or 3 times, it's pretty easy to do. But you can change these codes. They have no data that their definition of schoolwork is a good one. This is actually a huge SDO issue. Definitions of target behaviors really, really matter. And SDO has never, ever gone about measuring whether different definitions were more or less accurate. And so there's no reason why you have to use their schoolwork definition. You can use your own versions of schoolwork or engagement. I like Shapiro's engagement definitions better for a number of reasons. So, but if people email me, I can send you the Word document that has them in. Okay, what is SDO actually measuring? They give you almost a videotape rating of exactly how long was a kid on task, how many times they were disruptive. They give you a pure indice of that. Now, for years, and I think as a researcher, I still believe that that's rather perfect data. Okay, that data makes an awful lot of sense. But what is it not measuring? Your what? Yeah, we'll have to play with reactivity, because to me this is still the huge gaping hole in SDO literature that has never been looked at, and I don't think, there we go, yeah, I'm almost on, there we go, yay. Okay, we'll play with reactivity for a second. What I'm getting is it's not measuring any perception. Well, right, it's measuring exactly how a kid is behaving in a 10-minute window of time using CECOs. Exactly how on task they are for 10 minutes. Exactly. Now, this presentation will go over the course of 3 hours. Okay? In that 3-hour period, you will have a variability of behavior, but you're all typically well-behaved adults. Any kid that we're observing is not a well-behaved child. If they were a well-behaved child, we do not do systematic direct observation on them. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? Now, the difference between a poorly behaved child and a well-behaved child or a well-behaved adult is not top-end and bottom-end behavior. You have fallen asleep in classes. All of you have. You have, okay, so not all of you, but I've certainly fallen asleep in classes. Okay? You have said things that are disruptive in different events. Right? You've done things that are disrespectful in different places. It's just very rarely do you do so, and the context has to be such that it really inspires you into that particular place. With a real pain in the rear kid, they will go from the bottom end behavior to the top end behavior every 7, 8, 9 minutes. They'll vacillate between being engaged and off task. They'll vacillate from being disruptive to being compliant, to being respectful, to being disrespectful. Right? And so what we're capturing in that 10-minute period is exactly how they behave in that 10-minute period. But I don't think that we can naturally suspect that what happened in that 10-minute period necessarily means what will happen in the next 10-minute period, or the next 10-minute period, or the 10-minute period after that. So when we get an ultra-pure estimate of an incredibly variable target, we start to have to collect a lot of data. Right? The way we solve that is we collect another 10-minute data source, and we collect another 10-minute data source, and we collect another 10-minute observation, another 10-minute observation. Does anybody know what the estimates on SDO are for the number of times we need to observe children who are highly variable to get a generalizable statement about their behavior in that unit of time? If the child has very consistent behavior, highly level behavior, which of course to me means we're never measuring that child. We need somewhere between 8 to 10. So we're up to 80 to 100 minutes. If the child has a variable behavioral presentation, we can need upwards of 40 separate observations to make one statement. And that's not progress monitoring data. This is to make a statement about a current child's typical behavior over X period of time. Yes? No, and well, it depends on how you're going to apply it. So if we want to make a general statement about how a child is going to be in, I don't think we ever want 10 minutes. But let's do a 50-minute period, morning or afternoon. Okay? And we're looking at a 50-minute period. Frankly, if you want a whole day and you do variable times in the day, this is saying 40 times in the same context, not in variable context to make a generalizable statement about a child as a whole. Okay? Now, what this means to me is a couple things. Number one is that SDO has some psychometric issues that are concerning. And one of the largest one is, frankly, that in 1987, 1988, we stopped researching SDO. We decided that because you could get inter-observer reliability between two observers, because two observers would see the same thing at the same time, that it was perfectly accurate, and as such, we did not need to do any further analysis. Unfortunately, nobody uses SDO data except researchers for that statement. When I do my research, I couldn't care less how the kid is tomorrow, or the next day, or the time after that. I just care about my research data. For you guys, you couldn't care less how that kid was in that 10-minute period. You need to predict the next 10-minute period, or more importantly, the 10-minute period the next day or the day after the day after. Okay? Unfortunately, agreement in that one period doesn't mean we can predict future events. Right? Now, what's odd about this is if you think about the BASC, what does the BASC do really well? It predicts the next day. It says, look, if you want to make a typical statement about this kid, it's the kid's hyperactive. Right? So lots of us use SDO in this fashion. I'm going to go in and observe 3 times, 10 minutes a pop. And then I'm going to tell you, based on my observations, was the child exhibiting hyperactive behavior consistent to the BASC or what the teacher's report is? And frankly, the psychometric properties of SDO don't pan out to use that. You've got to collect a lot more than 3 observation periods. And I've got a lot of reports sitting back there from a number of years where I would do the little table with, he was on task 75% of the time, 20% of the time, 55% of the time. That seems pretty bad, right? And really, it's not built to be able to make those generalizable statements. If we instead simply want to look at reliability over a stream of data, so not predict the next period, but simply stream day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and look at the stream of data, then we actually get down to 7, 8, 9 data points. Okay? And what that means is we cannot make a statement about what will happen next, but the stream of data over 7, 8, 9 days can make a statement about the behavior within that unit of time with no generalizability. Now, if you think of baseline data, and being able to say, here's where the kid was at the start versus here's where the kid was after, then it ends up being a different utility for the data, and you need a little bit less data to be able to make that sort of statement. But even at those numbers, let's play a little bit with the feasibility issues, because I think this is the thing that kills SDO. Now, I personally don't think SDO is a lot of fun to do. You sit in the room, you got the beeps, you're not supposed to think, you're not supposed to write down other stuff. I hate IQ tests, I really do, but I enjoy giving them far more than, it's more fun than sitting in a room marking down the number of times the kid calls out, which is like 3 times in a 10-minute period. It's not that exciting, right? The kid who's defecating in the classroom never does it when you're observing. You miss all the fun. Okay, but even at 10 minutes, if we say we just need 5 data points per kid, if you start playing with the math, you're talking about 50 to 75 minutes. If you got 100 cases, you start talking about 80 to 125 hours of assessment. That's for 5 lousy data points on each case. That's nothing. 5 data points gives you baseline data. You're going to have to add another 10 or 15 data points per case to actually monitor progress, right? Sometimes I do this for school districts or for states. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of hours in states just to take 10 data points of SDO on every kid. It's a massive amount of resources. And that's not even including, you got to run around, you got to get there, you got to sit in the room, you got to talk to the teacher, you got to leave, all of that kind of stuff. Okay? This is a tremendously good method for low functioning kids and high risk cases. But this is not the go-to method just on a feasibility case. Feasibility step by step for every case. There's just not enough school psychologists, not enough people to be able to do this stuff. I don't know if I have a reactivity slide. Well, I do on benefits and limitations. And let's. I put this as the top one. And this is an interesting deal. So we know when we do SDO or naturalistic observation or ABC recording or whatever, when we go into the room, what happens?
The teacher says they've never been so good in their lives.
Right. The teacher says they've never, and they always say the kid's behavior changed. Okay. And I think that maybe, but what else has changed? Yeah, the teacher is not quite so mean that day. No, I'm being serious. I mean, the teacher who is a little bit snide with the kids is magically not as snide, right? I don't think I've had one legitimate curse word in this presentation because it's being videotaped. And anybody who's ever seen me present without a videotape, I unfortunately curse. I know it's not good. I shouldn't do it. Maybe I've cursed a little. I've really tried not to. I apologize to the camera. But you change your behavior. You act. You're more likely to, right? You're more likely to praise the child. Sometimes the teacher, for fun, wants to really show you just how screwed up this kid is, and so they kind of prompt the kid and mess with the kid. There are other kids in the classroom, and we got some random adult in the back of the room with an earbud beeping every once in a while, putting stuff on their iPad or their iPhone. Their behavior changes. And so what's fascinating about this to me is, you know what there's absolutely no research on? Zero? None? Not one published study? What's the reactivity effect on the backside of SDO? I mean, this would be easy research to do, wouldn't it? Videotape a classroom, right? And then put an observer in. What we know about reactivity is it dissipates over X amount of time. How many observations does it take to dissipate the reactivity effect? How many times do I need to have a video camera to where I just ignore the video camera? Is it 3? Is it 7? Is it 8? It's a tremendous line of research, but we have absolutely no analysis whatsoever on understanding what the reactivity effect is. Essentially, even if we want to say it's the best tool in the history of humanity, it's the best tool in the history of humanity at measuring something that never exists. That environment with you in the room. Okay? Now, that to me is an enormous flaw within this particular system. It's an enormous flaw within this particular tool, but it's one that is just never talked about, never discussed. There's some observer error drift that can be dealt with good training. Good observers can deal with that. I think there's major issues with feasibility. We're running a study coming up in February of where we need to get, this is a screening study with DBR, and we need to get 5 observations on each one of the classes in the study, and there's 50 classes in the study, and we have to do it over 2 weeks. And it's really not that much. It's like 250 observations. I have 5 people on my team. It's only 10 minutes an observation. The logistics for doing this, we are planning 3 months in advance just to logistically do this over this. And we're in two school districts. This is in Missouri, where all of the schools are like within blocks, you know, like right next to each other. And that's 250 observations. That's nothing in terms of the raw logistics. I was actually really stunned when we started doing our DBR research. I really was, coming out of a real behavioral program, was really embedded into the idea that SDO was much more researched than it has been. And frankly, I was under the belief that behavior rating scales were more researched than they had been. And, you know, again, this is an area where there was a lot of stuff in the 1980s. And about 87, 88, 89, the 2 camps, the rating scale camps, said essentially we figured this out, and they started designing them for commercial purposes. So build the better CBCL, build the better BASC, build the better whatever. And the SDO people said, well, we're behaviorists, we've solved the problem, we've got the perfect tool, and now let's use it. And the actual behavioral assessment industry stopped and didn't really pick up again until about 99, 2000. There were a few little things in there, but you see very little actual research on behavioral assessment from about 1988 up until about 2000 when it started to pick up again. Ken Merrill was essentially the only person in the 90s who was doing some real research, looking at this stuff. And frankly, nobody was listening to him very much. They really weren't listening to him on the development of his stuff. So.